The evening shadows stretched across the polished floors of the West Ridge Music Conservatory as Anthony Reeves packed away his violin. The building had quieted after a long day of rehearsals, with only the occasional distant note floating through the hallways. Anthony ran his fingers through his salt and pepper hair, frowning at the sheet music that had been giving him trouble all afternoon. As the cleaning cart's wheels squeaked into his practice room, Anthony barely looked up. He'd grown used to the middle-aged woman who cleaned the rooms each evening, her presence as regular as the metronome on his stand. "I'll be out in just a moment," he said, his voice carrying the slight edge of someone unused to being interrupted. "Take your time, sir," the woman replied softly. She was small in stature with work-worn hands, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. A name tag on her uniform read, Elena. Anthony resumed packing his expensive Italian violin into its velvet-lined case, while a recording of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 played from his phone. The challenging piece filled the room with its intricate melodies and powerful emotions. As Elena moved around him dusting the window ledges, Anthony noticed something that made him pause. She was humming along perfectly to one of the most difficult passages in the piece. He turned, watching her with narrowed eyes as she continued working, seemingly unaware that she'd captured his attention. It wasn't just that she was humming. Many people could do that. But she was following the complex rhythms and subtle changes that only someone with true musical knowledge would recognize. "You like Rachmaninoff?" he asked abruptly. Elena startled slightly, as if caught doing something wrong. "I'm sorry, was I making noise? I didn't mean to disturb you." "You weren't disturbing me. I'm asking if you enjoy this music." He gestured toward his phone. A small smile crossed her face. "Yes, it's beautiful. Rachmaninoff speaks to the soul like few others." Anthony raised an eyebrow. It was an unexpected response from someone he'd mentally classified as just part of the background of his prestigious world. In 20 years of performing with world-class orchestras, he'd developed certain assumptions about who truly understood fine music. "Speaks to the soul?" he repeated, unable to keep a hint of condescension from his voice. "That's quite poetic for a cleaning lady." Elena's smile dimmed slightly, but she continued her work. "Music doesn't care what job you have." Something about her quiet dignity irritated Anthony. Perhaps it was the long day of frustrating practice, or maybe it was the upcoming solo he still hadn't perfected despite his renowned talent. Whatever the reason, he felt a sudden urge to put this woman in her place. "So you think you understand this piece?" he challenged. "I didn't say that," Elena replied, wiping down a chair. "I just said it was beautiful. But you were humming along. Quite accurately, I might add." Elena shrugged. "I've heard it many times. Have you now?" Anthony closed his violin case with a definitive click. "Tell me, what makes this particular concerto so difficult to play?" Elena paused her cleaning, seemingly considering whether to engage with him. After a moment, she spoke quietly. "The technical demands are enormous. The handspans required for some of the chords are nearly impossible for many pianists. And the emotional range, from tenderness to thunder in moments. It's not just about playing the notes." Anthony blinked, surprised by her articulate answer. Most casual listeners wouldn't know such details. "That's correct," he admitted reluctantly. Then, unable to help himself, he added, "But understanding a piece intellectually is very different from being able to play it. This is considered one of the most challenging pieces in the piano repertoire." "Yes, I know." Elena moved to empty the small trash bin by the door. "Do you play?" Anthony asked suddenly. Elena hesitated. "A little. Long ago." An idea formed in Anthony's mind, one that would satisfy his curiosity while also reminding this woman of the vast gulf between appreciating music and mastering it. He glanced at his watch. It was nearly 8 p.m. and the building would be mostly empty by now. "There's a grand piano in room 103, he said casually. "Would you like to try playing this piece?" Elena's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, I couldn't. Those instruments are for students and faculty." "I'm faculty," Anthony replied with a thin smile. "And I'm inviting you." "I haven't played in many years," she protested softly. "Just a few bars, then. To see if you truly understand the piece you claim to love so much." His challenge hung in the air between them. Elena looked down at her cleaning cart, then back at Anthony. Something flickered in her eyes. Perhaps pride, perhaps memory. "All right," she said finally. "Just for a moment, Anthony. felt a small thrill of satisfaction as he led Elena down the hallway toward room 103. He'd been teaching at Westridge for 5 years since partially retiring from the concert circuit, and he'd seen countless talented students falter when faced with pieces like Rachmaninoff's Third. The idea that this cleaning woman thought she could play even a portion of it was almost amusing. As they walked, they passed Dr. Huang, the department chair, who raised his eyebrows at the sight of Anthony walking alongside the cleaning staff. "Victor," Anthony called out, "care to join us for a moment? Elena here is going to try her hand at the Rachmaninoff Third." Dr. Huang looked confused but intrigued. "Is she now? Well, this I have to see." Elena's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she continued walking with quiet dignity. By the time they reached room 103, they'd been joined by Lucia Torres, the vocal instructor who had been working late with a student. "What's happening?" Lucia asked curiously. "Our cleaning lady apparently appreciates Rachmaninoff," Anthony explained with a slight smirk. "She's going to demonstrate her understanding of the Third Concerto." Lucia gave Elena a sympathetic look but followed them into the room where a magnificent Steinway grand piano gleamed under the soft lighting. Anthony gestured toward the bench with a flourish. "Please," he said, "show us what you know." Elena stood frozen for a moment, looking at the instrument as if it might bite her. The small audience watched with varying expressions. Anthony's smug certainty, Dr. Huang's academic curiosity, and Lucia's growing discomfort with the situation. "This isn't necessary," Lucia said softly. "Anthony, what exactly are you trying to prove here?" "Nothing at all," Anthony replied smoothly. Elena expressed her love for this piece. "I'm simply giving her the opportunity to explore it hands-on." Elena slowly set down her cleaning cloth and approached the piano. She wiped her hands on her uniform skirt before carefully sitting on the bench, adjusting it with the familiarity of someone who had done so many times before. "I haven't played in public for a very long time," she said quietly, not looking at any of them. "Take your time," Dr. Huang said kindly, shooting Anthony a disapproving glance. Elena placed her hands above the keys, and they hovered there trembling slightly. Anthony felt a twinge of regret. Perhaps this had gone too far. He was about to suggest they forget the whole thing when Elena took a deep breath and lowered her fingers to the keys. The first notes were hesitant, uncertain. Anthony exchanged glances with Dr. Huang, his expectations confirmed. But then something changed. Elena's back straightened slightly, and her hands began to move with increasing confidence. The opening melody of the concerto filled the room, not perfectly played but with unmistakable understanding of its structure. Anthony's smirk faded. Lucia's eyes widened. Dr. Huang leaned forward in his chair. As Elena continued to play, her initial nervousness seemed to melt away. Her technique was rusty, certainly missing some notes, simplifying some of the more challenging passages. But beneath the imperfections lay something that couldn't be taught, a profound connection to the music itself. When she finally stopped, the room had fallen completely silent. Elena's hands returned to her lap, and she stared down at them as if surprised by what they had just done. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Dr. Huang asked finally, breaking the silence. Elena stood up quickly, smoothing her uniform. "I should get back to work. I've taken too much of your time." "Wait," Anthony said, his voice stripped of its earlier condescension. "That wasn't just a little playing. You've had serious training." Elena met his eyes for the first time. "A lifetime ago in another country. It doesn't matter now." "It absolutely matters," Lucia interjected warmly. "You have a gift." "Gifts don't pay the bills," Elena replied with a small, sad smile. "Thank you for letting me play your beautiful piano. I should finish my work now." As she walked toward the door, Anthony found himself following her. "I'd like to hear more," he said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. "Perhaps tomorrow? After your shift?" Elena paused at the doorway, studying his face as if looking for signs of mockery. Finding none, she gave a small nod. "Perhaps," she said softly before disappearing into the hallway, the squeak of her cleaning cart fading into the distance. Anthony turned back to find Dr. Huang and Lucia staring at him. "Well," Dr. Huang said thoughtfully, "it seems there's more to our cleaning lady than meets the eye." Anthony nodded slowly, his mind racing with questions about the woman who had just turned his assumptions upside down. Who was she really? And how had someone with such obvious talent ended up pushing a cleaning cart through these hallowed halls? For the first time in years, Anthony felt something he hadn't expected, a genuine curiosity about someone else's story, and the uncomfortable awareness of his own prejudice. As he gathered his belongings to leave, the melody Elena had played continued to echo in his mind, haunting him with its imperfect beauty. Anthony couldn't sleep that night. Each time he closed his eyes, he heard Elena's playing, imperfect yet somehow more moving than many flawless performances he'd witnessed throughout his career. There was something in her touch on the keys that spoke of deep understanding, of music lived rather than merely learned. Morning found him at the conservatory earlier than usual, scanning the hallways for a glimpse of her. But the cleaning staff had already finished their morning rounds and Elena was nowhere to be found. Anthony settled into his teaching routine with less enthusiasm than normal, his mind drifting during student performances. "You seem distracted today," observed Lucia as they passed in the faculty lounge that afternoon. "Still thinking about our cleaning lady pianist?" Anthony poured himself a cup of coffee. "Wouldn't you be? Someone with that level of innate musicality doesn't just appear out of nowhere." "People have complicated lives, Anthony," Lucia said gently. "Not everyone with talent gets to pursue it. But to end up cleaning floors? With hands that can play Rachmaninoff?" He shook his head. "It doesn't make sense." Lucia gave him a knowing look. "Why does it bother you so much?" Anthony paused, the coffee cup halfway to his lips. Why did it bother him? Was it just professional curiosity or something deeper? Perhaps the uncomfortable recognition of his own assumptions? "I just want to understand," he said finally. "Then ask her," Lucia suggested. "But this time, try listening instead of testing." The afternoon dragged on endlessly. Anthony found himself checking his watch repeatedly during his final master class, earning curious looks from his students. When the session finally ended, he hurried through the hallways, arriving at his practice room just as Elena's cart appeared around the corner. She slowed when she saw him waiting, her expression guarded. "Good evening," he said, attempting a friendly smile that felt strangely awkward on his face. How long had it been since he'd genuinely tried to connect with someone outside his musical circle? "Good evening, Professor Reeves," Elena replied politely. "Anthony?" "Please." She nodded but offered nothing more, beginning to clean the room with efficient movements that suggested she hoped to finish quickly and move on. "You said you might play again today," Anthony ventured. Elena continued wiping down surfaces. "I have many rooms to clean. I could speak with your supervisor, explain that I've asked for your assistance with something." Her hands paused. "Why?" It was a simple question, but Anthony found himself struggling to articulate an answer that didn't sound condescending or self-serving. "Because I'd like to hear you play again," he said honestly, "and because I owe you an apology for yesterday. My behavior was unkind." Elena studied him for a long moment, seeming to weigh his sincerity. "I finish at 9, she said finally. "If you're still here, perhaps I can play for a few minutes." Anthony nodded, relief washing over him. "I'll be here." The hours until 9 o'clock passed in a blur of sheet music and scales as Anthony tried to focus on his own practice. When Elena appeared in the doorway, he realized he'd been watching the clock, rather than his music, for the past 30 minutes. They walked together to the same practice room as the day before, but this time the hallways were empty. No audience, no public challenge. "How long have you worked here?" Anthony asked as they walked. "Almost 3 years. And before that?" A faint smile touched her lips. "Before that, I cleaned offices downtown. And before that, hotel rooms. I meant before you came to this country." Elena's smile faded. That was another life. They reached the practice room and Elena sat at the piano without prompting. This time her hands showed less hesitation as they settled on the keys. "What would you like to hear?" she asked. "Whatever you feel like playing." She nodded and began a gentle Chopin nocturne. The piece flowed from her fingers with a naturalness that made Anthony's breath catch. There were still occasional missed notes, moments where her technique showed years of disuse. But the musicality, the soul behind the playing, was extraordinary. When she finished, Anthony found himself at a loss for words. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked finally. Elena's hands rested in her lap. "Moscow Conservatory. A long time ago." Anthony stared at her in disbelief. "You studied at Moscow? That's one of the finest music schools in the world." Yes, but how? Why? He gestured helplessly at her cleaning uniform. Elena sighed, a deep sound that seemed to come from somewhere ancient within her. Life doesn't always go as planned, Professor. Anthony, she amended. Sometimes we must leave dreams behind to survive. Tell me, he said, sitting beside her on the piano bench, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Please. Elena was quiet for so long that Anthony thought she might refuse. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear. I was 12 when I was accepted to the Moscow Conservatory's School for Gifted Children. My mother cleaned houses to pay for my lessons before that. My father left when I was very young. He didn't believe in wasting money on a girl's education. She ran a finger lightly along the edge of a piano key, not pressing down enough to make a sound. My teacher, Professor Baranovskaya, said I had rare talent. By 16, I was performing with orchestras. By 19, I was preparing for the International Tchaikovsky competition. That's incredible, Anthony murmured. Elena nodded, her eyes distant. Then everything changed. The political situation. It became dangerous. There were crackdowns, disappearances. My mother's brother had been outspoken against the government. One night men came to our apartment looking for him. Her voice remained steady, but Anthony could see the tension in her shoulders. They didn't find him, but they took my mother instead. I was at a late rehearsal. When I came home, neighbors told me what happened. Professor Baranovskaya helped me get out of the country that night. I had nothing but a small bag and my competition music. Anthony listened in stunned silence. The story was both unimaginable and tragically common, the collision of artistic dreams with harsh political realities. Did you ever find out what happened to your mother? Elena shook her head. For 3 years, I tried everything. Contacted everyone I could think of. Eventually, a former neighbor told me she had died in detention. Whether it's true or not, I'll never know. But after that, I stopped searching. And I stopped playing. Why? Anthony asked, though he immediately regretted the question. Who was he to demand explanations for how someone coped with such trauma? Surprisingly, Elena didn't seem offended. Music was my connection to that life, to my mother, to my teacher, to who I was meant to become. Playing felt like reopening a wound that would never heal. And there were practical concerns. I needed to eat, to find shelter, to build a new life. But to give up music entirely? I never gave it up entirely, Elena corrected him gently. I listen. I hum along. Sometimes when no one is around, I find a piano and play a little. But performing? That dream belonged to another person. Anthony tried to imagine it, having everything you'd worked for stripped away in a single night. The thought was unbearable. Do you still have family in Moscow? No one that I know of. My mother was an only child except for her brother, who disappeared years ago. My father, who knows? They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her story filling the space between them. Will you play something else? Anthony asked finally. Elena placed her hands on the keys again and began playing Debussy's Clair de Lune. The familiar piece emerged with a delicate touch that brought tears to Anthony's eyes. He had heard it played hundreds of times, had taught it to countless students, but never had it sounded quite like this, like moonlight itself transformed into sound. When she finished, neither spoke for several moments. You should be teaching here. Not cleaning, Anthony said at last. Elena gave a small, sad laugh. I have no degree, no recent performance history, no recommendations. Besides, I am at peace with my life now. The past is past, but your gift is still mine, she interrupted gently, whether I play on this beautiful grand piano or simply carry the music in my heart. Anthony wanted to argue, to insist that talent like hers shouldn't be wasted, but something in her calm acceptance stopped him. Who was he to tell her how to heal from wounds he could barely comprehend? Thank you for sharing your story, he said instead. And your music. Elena nodded and stood up. I should finish my rounds. Would you play again tomorrow? Anthony asked, trying to keep the eagerness from his voice. A small smile touched her lips. Perhaps. But now you know my story. What will we talk about tomorrow? Your technique, Anthony replied without hesitation. You're favoring your right hand and your left wrist position needs adjustment. Elena's laugh was unexpected and bright, transforming her face. Always the teacher. Always, he agreed with a smile of his own. As they left the practice room together, Anthony realized something had shifted between them, and perhaps within himself as well. He had entered this interaction seeking to satisfy his curiosity about a musical mystery. He was leaving with something far more valuable, a reminder of music's power to connect humans across every barrier of circumstance and assumption. Tomorrow, he thought he would bring her the Chopin etudes he'd been working on with his advanced students. He had a feeling Elena might have some insights even he hadn't considered. Word spread quickly through the small world of Westridge Conservatory. By the end of the week, Anthony's evening sessions with Elena had become something of an open secret among the faculty. Lucia had joined them twice, bringing along her thermos of herbal tea. Dr. Huang had stopped by with his well-worn book of Bach preludes. Even stern Professor Chen from the theory department had lingered in the doorway one evening, pretending to organize his briefcase while Elena played through a Mozart sonata. "You've become quite popular," Anthony commented as they walked toward the practice room on Friday evening. "I may need to start selling tickets." Elena smiled but shook her head. "I prefer our quiet sessions. Too many people watching makes my hands shake." "Stage fright? You?" Anthony couldn't hide his surprise. "But you were preparing for the Tchaikovsky competition. That's one of the most pressure-filled performances in the world." "That was 23 years ago," Elena replied. "And even then, I would be sick with nerves for days before performances. Professor Baranovskaya used to say I played best when I forgot people were listening." They reached the practice room to find the door already open. Inside, Dr. Huang sat chatting with a tall, elegant woman Anthony recognized immediately, Irina Petrov, the conservatory's director and one of the most respected pianists in the country. "Ah, there you are," Dr. Huang said, rising from his chair. "Director Petrov wanted to join us this evening. I hope that's all right." Elena froze in the doorway, her eyes wide. Anthony felt her stiffen beside him and instinctively placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Perhaps another time," he suggested, sensing Elena's discomfort. "We were planning a rather technical session tonight." Director Petrov waved a hand dismissively. "Technical is exactly what I'm interested in, Anthony. Victor has been telling me about your cleaning lady with the extraordinary musical insight." Her gaze settled on Elena with undisguised curiosity. "I admit I found his description hard to believe." Elena took a small step backward. "I should finish my rounds. There are still classrooms to clean on the 3rd floor." "The 3rd floor can wait," Director Petrov said, her voice gentle but firm. "I've been a pianist for 40 years, and I've learned that true musical gifts are rare enough to deserve attention when they appear, no matter where we find them." Anthony glanced at Elena, trying to gauge her reaction. Her face had settled into a careful neutrality that revealed nothing of her thoughts. "Just one piece," he suggested quietly, "then we'll continue as planned." After a long moment, Elena nodded and moved toward the piano. As she sat down, Anthony noticed her hands were trembling slightly. She placed them in her lap, took a deep breath, and then positioned them over the keys. The room fell silent as the first notes of Beethoven's Pathétique sonata filled the air. Anthony had heard Elena play this piece earlier in the week, but tonight something was different. The pressure of Director Petrov's presence seemed to both constrain and inspire her. The opening was more hesitant than usual, but as she continued into the movement, her playing became increasingly confident and expressive. Anthony watched Director Petrov's face, seeing the professional assessment in her eyes gradually give way to genuine appreciation. By the time Elena reached the development section, the director was leaning forward slightly, her full attention captured. When Elena finished the first movement, she kept her eyes on the keys, her breath coming quickly as if she'd been running. Director Petrov was the first to speak. "Where did you study?" "Moscow," Elena replied softly. "Under whom?" "Natalia Baranovskaya." Director Petrov's eyebrows rose. "The great Baranovskaya? She rarely took students. She made exceptions sometimes, clearly." Director Petrov stood and approached the piano. "Your technique shows her influence, that particular attention to voicing, the way you shape a phrase. But there are issues. Your left hand has lost some strength, and your pedaling is occasionally uncertain." Elena nodded, accepting the critique without defense. "It has been many years, and yet the musicality remains." Director Petrov studied her thoughtfully. "How long have you been cleaning at Westridge?" Almost 3 years, and before that? Other jobs, other places. Director Petrov's eyes narrowed slightly at the vague response, but she didn't press further. Instead, she turned to Anthony and Dr. Huang. "Gentlemen, would you mind giving us a few minutes alone?" Anthony hesitated, glancing at Elena for her reaction. After a moment, she gave him a small nod. He and Dr. Huang stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind them. "What do you think she wants?" Dr. Huang asked in a low voice. Anthony shook his head. "I'm not sure. But Irina doesn't waste time on lost causes. If she's interested in Elena, there must be a reason." They waited in the hallway for nearly 20 minutes, their conversation drifting from music to the upcoming semester's curriculum, though Anthony found it hard to focus. When the door finally opened, Director Petrov emerged alone. "Where's Elena?" Anthony asked immediately, still inside, thinking over my proposition. Director Petrov's expression was unreadable. "An interesting woman, your cleaning lady. Extraordinary talent buried under extraordinary circumstances." She adjusted her elegant scarf. "Good evening, gentlemen." As Director Petrov walked away, Anthony hurried into the practice room. Elena sat still on the piano bench, staring at her hands. "What happened?" he asked, taking a seat beside her. "What did she say to you?" Elena looked up at him, her expression a complex mixture of emotions, confusion, hope, fear. "She offered me a job," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cleaning? Teaching?" Elena shook her head as if she couldn't quite believe it herself. "She wants me to teach beginners piano and assist with the community outreach program." Anthony felt a surge of joy. "Elena, that's wonderful, is it?" She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening campus. "I haven't taught a day in my life. I haven't played seriously in over 2 decades. My technique is full of flaws. All fixable with practice," Anthony insisted. "The musicality, the understanding, that's what can't be taught. And you have that in abundance." She said similar things, Elena admitted. "But it feels impossible. I'm a cleaning woman, not a professor." "You're a musician who's been cleaning," Anthony corrected. "There's a difference." Elena turned to face him. "What if I fail? What if I can't connect with students? What if my playing never returns to what it once was?" "Then you'll have tried," Anthony said simply. "Isn't that better than wondering what might have been?" Elena didn't respond, her gaze returning to the window. "What else did she say?" Anthony prompted gently. "She wants me to perform. A small recital at first as part of the faculty showcase next month." Elena's voice caught. "I haven't performed in public since I was 19 years old." Now Anthony understood her fear. It wasn't just about teaching. It was about stepping back into a world she'd painfully left behind, risking fresh disappointment and failure. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said. "Take some time to think about it." Elena nodded, but her expression remained troubled. How would the other faculty react? "I've been cleaning their offices, emptying their trash cans. Now suddenly I'd be their colleague?" "Some might be surprised," Anthony admitted. "A few might even be resentful. But most would welcome you, especially once they hear you play." "And what about you?" Elena asked, turning to face him directly. "Where do you fit in all this?" The question caught Anthony off guard. "Me?" "Yes, would you be embarrassed to have the woman who cleans your practice room teaching alongside you?" "Of course not," Anthony replied instantly, then paused, forcing himself to be honest. "A week ago, perhaps. But not now. Not after hearing you play. Not after knowing your story." Elena studied him carefully. "Why have you helped me, Anthony? Is it just because of how I play?" It was a fair question, one Anthony hadn't fully examined himself. Was it only her talent that had captured his interest? Or was there something more? Perhaps a recognition of his own prejudices, a desire to make amends. "At first, yes," he admitted. "I was intrigued by the mystery, how someone with your abilities ended up cleaning floors. But now," he hesitated, searching for the right words, "now I simply want to see justice done. You deserve to be recognized for who you truly are." "And who am I truly?" There was a challenge in her voice. Anthony smiled. "A pianist with dirt under her fingernails. A teacher who hasn't discovered her students yet. An artist who lost her stage but never her art." For the first time that evening, Elena's expression softened. "You should have been a poet instead of a violinist." "God forbid. The world has enough mediocre poets." Anthony stood up. "It's getting late. Sleep on Director Petrov's offer. There's no rush to decide." Elena nodded, gathering her cleaning supplies. As they walked to the door, she paused. Will you come tomorrow? Saturday? You don't work on Saturdays, Anthony pointed out. No, Elena agreed. But I thought perhaps, if you're free, we could play together. Your violin, my piano. I used to love chamber music. Anthony felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest. I'd like that very much. What shall we play? The Frank Sonata. Do you know it? One of my favorites. Mine too. Elena's smile was small but genuine. 2 o'clock? I can get a key from the maintenance office. 2 o'clock, Anthony confirmed. And Elena? Whatever you decide about Director Petrov's offer, playing with you would be an honor. As they parted ways in the hallway, Anthony realized he was looking forward to their Saturday session more than he had anticipated. There was something about music shared between equals that transcended mere performance. A conversation without words. A connection deeper than ordinary friendship. Whether Elena chose to remain a cleaning woman who played beautifully, or step into a new role as teacher and performer, Anthony knew that his own perspective had been permanently altered. He would never again make assumptions about the people who moved through the background of his life. Their hidden talents and untold stories forever a mystery, unless someone took the time to listen. Saturday afternoon arrived with golden autumn sunshine streaming through the practice room windows. Anthony had been there since 1:30, warming up with scales and adjusting his violin. He'd chosen his best instrument for today, not the sturdy teaching violin he used for demonstrations, but his prized Italian violin with its warm, rich tone that responded to the lightest touch. As 2 o'clock approached, he found himself checking his watch repeatedly. What if she changed her mind? What if yesterday's conversation with Director Petrov had scared her away completely? But at precisely 2, there was a soft knock at the door and Elena entered. Anthony almost didn't recognize her at first. Gone was the gray cleaning uniform, replaced by a simple blue dress. Her hair, usually pulled back in a tight bun for work, now fell in soft waves to her shoulders. Most striking was the change in her posture. She stood taller, her shoulders relaxed yet straight, carrying herself with a quiet dignity. You look, Anthony began, then stopped, suddenly aware that commenting on her appearance might seem inappropriate. Elena smiled slightly. Different? Yes, he admitted, but in a good way. Very professional. She set her bag down and removed a folder of sheet music. I found the Frank in the library. I hope you don't mind that I practiced a little this morning. Of course not. Did you use this room? Elena nodded. Director Petrov arranged it. She's been very kind. Anthony noticed something different in her voice when she mentioned the director, a mixture of gratitude and lingering disbelief. Have you made a decision about her offer? He asked, trying to sound casual as he rosined his bow. Not yet. Elena arranged the music on the piano. But I told her I would play at the faculty showcase. Just one piece. Anthony felt a surge of pleasure. That's wonderful. What will you perform? I'm thinking of the Scriabin Etude in D-sharp minor. It's short enough that I won't wear out my welcome, but challenging enough to show what I can do. A perfect choice, Anthony agreed, recognizing the piece, one of Scriabin's most beautiful and technically demanding works. So you're considering the teaching position? Elena sat at the piano bench, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them down. I spent all night thinking about it, about where I've been, about where I could go. She looked up at him. I'm scared, Anthony. This feels like standing at the edge of a cliff. All important decisions do, he said gently. What if I take this leap and fall? What if I can't teach? What if students laugh at my accent or faculty whisper about my past? Anthony pulled a chair closer to the piano. First, anyone who laughs at your accent would be dismissed from this conservatory immediately. Second, your past is your strength, not your weakness. And third, he held her gaze steadily, you won't fall. I won't let you. A faint blush colored Elena's cheeks. You hardly know me. I know enough, Anthony said simply. I know you've survived things that would have broken many people. I know you kept music in your heart even when you couldn't play. And I know you have a gift for communicating through sound that can't be taught, only shared. Elena looked down at her hands. I've been cleaning for so long I sometimes forget who I was before, who I could be again. Then let's remember together. Anthony raised his violin. Shall we play? She nodded, positioning her hands over the keys. The opening notes of the Frank violin sonata emerged from the piano, questioning, searching, full of yearning. Anthony waited, counting silently, then drew his bow across the strings to answer her call. What happened next was something neither of them had fully anticipated. Their first attempt was tentative, each feeling out the other's interpretation. They stopped, adjusted, discussed a few passages, and began again. The second time flowed more naturally, musical phrases passing between violin and piano like a conversation between old friends. By the third playthrough, something magical had emerged. They were no longer simply performing notes on a page. They were creating something new together, something that transcended the written score. When Anthony's violin sang out the soaring melody in the second movement, Elena's piano embraced it with harmonies that seemed to anticipate his every nuance. When her fingers danced through the intricate passages of the finale, his violin provided the perfect counterpoint. They reached the end of the piece and held the final notes, letting them fade into silence. For several seconds, neither moved nor spoke, both caught in the lingering spell of what they had created. "That was," Anthony began, then shook his head, unable to find adequate words. "Yes," Elena agreed softly. "It was." A gentle knock at the door broke the moment. They turned to find Lucia standing in the doorway, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. "I was passing by and heard—" She gestured helplessly. "It was beautiful." Elena's smile was shy but pleased. "Thank you." "I've never heard the Frank played quite like that," Lucia continued, entering the room. "Anthony, you've always performed it brilliantly, but today there was something different." She looked at Elena. "You bring out something in his playing that I haven't heard before." Anthony felt a strange mixture of embarrassment and pride at Lucia's words. Was it true? Had Elena's playing changed his own? "We were just getting acquainted with the piece," he said modestly. "No," Lucia shook her head firmly. "This wasn't a reading. This was a true collaboration." She turned to Elena. "Have you decided about Director Petrov's offer?" Elena glanced at Anthony, then back to Lucia. "I'm still considering it." "Consider it accepted," came a new voice from the doorway. Director Petrov stood there, elegant as always in a tailored pantsuit. "I've heard enough." Elena's eyes widened. "You were listening?" "The entire second floor was listening," Director Petrov replied dryly. "You two play together as if you've been chamber partners for years." Anthony felt a flush creep up his neck. Had they really drawn such an audience? Director Petrov approached the piano. "Elena, I understand your hesitation. Changing your life is never easy, but after what I just heard, I'm more convinced than ever that you belong in our faculty." Elena's hands twisted together in her lap. "I haven't decided." "Take all the time you need to think," Director Petrov interrupted gently. "The position will remain open for you. But in the meantime," she placed a small key on the piano. "This is yours. It opens practice room 210. It's yours for 2 hours every morning before your cleaning shift begins and any evening after your work is done." Elena stared at the key. "I don't understand. Whether you accept the teaching position or not, you need to practice. Your muscles need to remember what your heart never forgot." Director Petrov's voice softened. "Consider it a gift from one pianist to another." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Director Petrov smiled. "I look forward to hearing you at the showcase." With a nod to Anthony and Lucia, she left as suddenly as she had appeared. Lucia squeezed Elena's shoulder. "She's right, you know. You're too talented to hide anymore." She followed Director Petrov out, closing the door softly behind her. In the quiet that followed, Elena picked up the key, turning it over in her fingers as if it were made of gold. "Are you all right?" Anthony asked gently. She nodded, blinking back tears. "It's been so long since anyone believed in me like this. Since I believed in myself, it can be overwhelming." "Yes." Elena took a deep breath. "When I left Moscow, I locked away more than just my music. I locked away my dreams, my identity, my future. Opening that door again feels frightening?" "Frightening, yes. But also—" She looked up at him, her eyes bright with something he hadn't seen before. "Also exhilarating," Anthony smiled. "That's how music should feel. Always." Elena slipped the key into her pocket and straightened her shoulders. "We should play the second movement again." I rushed the tempo in the middle section. Anthony laughed, delighted by her sudden shift to musical critique. Did you? I didn't notice. I noticed, and Director Petrov certainly noticed. Elena positioned her hands over the keys again, from the beginning of the second movement. As they played through the movement again, Anthony observed the subtle changes in Elena's technique, her growing confidence, her increasingly assured touch, the way she leaned into the emotional peaks of the music without fear. This was no longer a woman who had given up her dreams. This was an artist reclaiming her voice. When they finished, Elena nodded with satisfaction. Better. Still not perfect, but better. Perfection is overrated, Anthony said, lowering his violin. What you bring to the music is far more important than technical flawlessness. Elena gave him a skeptical look. Says the man who makes his students repeat passages 50 times until every note is exactly right. Anthony had the grace to look embarrassed. Do the students complain about me that much? The practice rooms have thin walls, she replied with a hint of mischief. And cleaning staff hear everything. They both laughed. And Anthony realized how much he enjoyed this new dynamic between them. The easy banter, the shared understanding of their art, the gradual dissolution of the barriers that had once separated them. Would you have dinner with me tonight? He asked suddenly. To celebrate your key and your decision to perform at the showcase. Elena's laughter faded, replaced by a cautious expression. Dinner? Yes, you know, food, conversation, possibly a glass of wine. Anthony felt uncharacteristically nervous. There's a good Italian restaurant near campus. Are you asking as a colleague or? She left the question unfinished. As a friend, Anthony said carefully. Who admires your courage and your talent, and who would like to get to know you better outside of these walls? Elena considered this for a long moment. I would like that, she said finally. But I should go home and change first. Of course. Shall we say 7 o'clock? I could pick you up, she shook her head. I'll meet you at the restaurant. 7 o'clock. As they packed up their instruments and music, Anthony found himself looking forward to the evening with unexpected anticipation. Whether Elena ultimately chose to join the faculty or continue cleaning while rebuilding her musical skills, he knew that something significant had changed, not just for her, but for him as well. He had entered this journey seeking to solve the mystery of a cleaning woman who played Rachmaninoff. What he'd discovered instead was a reminder of why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. Not for the accolades or the prestige, but for moments like today, when two people could speak to each other's souls through sound, bridging every divide of background and circumstance. 4 weeks passed in a whirlwind of change. Elena continued her cleaning duties during the day, but her evenings and early mornings were now filled with music. The key to practice room 210 became her most treasured possession, opening the door to a world she had long abandoned. Each day her fingers grew stronger, more certain on the keys. Anthony found himself arranging his schedule to practice during her evening sessions. Their musical partnership deepened with each passing day as they worked through sonatas by Beethoven, Brahms, and Debussy. Sometimes they would talk for hours afterward, sharing stories of performances past, teachers remembered, music loved and lost and found again. Their dinner at the Italian restaurant had been followed by others, simple meals shared between friends who were gradually becoming something more. Anthony had been surprised to discover Elena's quiet sense of humor, her passion for poetry, her love of spicy food that had brought tears to his eyes when she'd cooked for him at her modest apartment. But as the faculty showcase approached, Elena's anxiety grew. Anthony could see it in the tension of her shoulders, the way she would stop mid-phrase and shake her head, starting the passage again and again until her hands cramped. You're pushing yourself too hard, he said one evening, a week before the showcase. They were in practice room 210, and Elena had been working on the same page of the Scriabin etude for nearly an hour. It needs to be perfect, she replied, flexing her fingers. Everyone will be watching, judging. No one is judging you, Elena. She gave him a skeptical look. Of course they are. The former cleaning lady playing at a faculty showcase? They'll be waiting for me to fail. Anthony sat beside her on the piano bench. That's not true. They've heard you play now. They know your worth. Some do. Others whisper. She closed the piano lid gently. I heard 2 composition students yesterday. One asked if I got the spot through some diversity program. The other wondered if I was sleeping with someone important. Anthony's face flushed with anger. Who said that? I'll have them— No, Elena interrupted firmly. This is exactly what I feared. I don't want special treatment or protection. I don't want to be pitied or defended. I want to earn my place through my playing alone. And you will, Anthony insisted. One performance and those whispers will stop forever. Elena wasn't so sure. One performance cannot erase 20 years of absence from music. My technique still has flaws. My repertoire is limited. There are gaps in my musical knowledge. All fixable with time and work, Anthony said. Stop thinking about what you lack and focus on what you have. Your musicality, your soul, your life experience. These bring something to the music that most technically perfect players never achieve. Elena smiled faintly. You've changed, you know. When we first met, you were all about technical perfection. Anthony laughed. Was I that bad? Terrifying, she confirmed, her eyes twinkling. The great Professor Reeves making students tremble with his demands for flawless scales. Perhaps I needed reminding of what music is really about. He covered her hand with his own. You did that for me, Elena. Now let me do the same for you. Trust in your gift. Play from your heart and no one will notice if a few notes are missed along the way. She turned her hand beneath his, twining their fingers together. I'll try. The night of the faculty showcase arrived cold and clear, stars pricking the dark sky above the conservatory. The recital hall buzzed with conversation as students, faculty, and community members found their seats. Anthony stood backstage, adjusting his bow tie and peering occasionally through the curtain at the growing crowd. Looking for someone? Lucia asked, appearing beside him in a midnight blue concert dress. Elena. She said she would meet me backstage at 7. It's nearly 7:30. Lucia patted his arm. She'll be here. Stop worrying. I'm not worried, Anthony protested, though the knot in his stomach suggested otherwise. Director Petrov approached, program in hand. Anthony, you're on after Lucia. Then Elena will close the first half. She glanced around. Where is she? I'm sure she's just getting ready, Lucia said smoothly. First showcase jitters. Director Petrov nodded, though her expression remained concerned. Let me know when she arrives. As she walked away, Anthony pulled out his phone to call Elena, but at that moment the backstage door opened. Elena stood there breathless as if she'd been running. She wore a simple black dress, her hair swept up elegantly, her face pale but composed. I'm sorry I'm late, she said as Anthony hurried to her side. I almost didn't come. His heart sank. Why? Fear, she admitted simply. I stood in my apartment dressed and ready and suddenly couldn't move. 23 years since my last public performance. 23 years of silence. But you're here now, Anthony said gently. She nodded. I remembered what you said about playing from the heart, and I realized that even if I fail tonight, even if I never play another note in public again, I need to do this for the girl I was, for the woman I am now. Anthony wanted to embrace her, to tell her how proud he was, but they were interrupted by the stage manager announcing 5 minutes until the showcase began. Lucia was needed for her opening performance, and they all took their places in the wings. The showcase began with Lucia's beautiful rendering of a Schubert Lied, followed by performances from the composition, voice, and string faculty. Anthony's violin solo, the Bach chaconne, went well, though he was aware of playing with less focus than usual, his mind partially on the woman waiting in the wings. And then it was Elena's turn. Anthony squeezed her hand as she passed him. From the heart, he whispered. Elena walked onto the stage with steady steps, acknowledging the audience with a graceful nod before sitting at the piano. She took a moment to adjust the bench, to center herself, to place her hands just so above the keys. Then she began to play. The opening notes of Scriabin's Etude in D-sharp minor filled the hall, haunting, yearning, filled with a sense of longing that caught at the heart. Anthony watched from the wings as Elena leaned into the music, her body swaying slightly, her face transformed by complete absorption in the piece. The audience sat motionless, captured by the raw emotion pouring from the piano. Even the usual coughs and rustles of a live performance were absent, as if everyone in the hall was holding their breath together. As Elena moved into the climactic section, her fingers dancing across the keys with newfound confidence, Anthony saw something extraordinary happen. The last traces of the cleaning woman fell away completely, replaced by the artist she had always been beneath the gray uniform and careful invisibility. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of profound silence. Then the audience erupted. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. People rose to their feet, their faces reflecting the same emotional journey Elena had just taken them on. Anthony saw several of his colleagues, hardened professionals who had heard the world's greatest pianists, wiping tears from their eyes. Elena seemed momentarily stunned by the response. She rose from the bench and offered a shy bow, then another as the applause continued unabated. When she finally left the stage, she practically fell into Anthony's waiting arms. "You did it," he murmured into her hair. "You were magnificent." "I missed notes in the middle section," she whispered back. Anthony laughed. "Did you?" No one noticed. No one cared. You gave them something far more valuable than technical perfection. Director Petrov appeared beside them, her usual composure slightly undone. "Elena, that was—" She shook her head, seemingly at a loss for words. "The position is yours whenever you're ready, and not just teaching beginners. With playing like that, you should be working with our advanced students as well." Elena's eyes widened. "Truly?" "Absolutely. We need your voice here." Director Petrov squeezed her arm. "Take the weekend to decide. But know that there is a place for you at Westridge, not because we pity you or because of your history, but because of what you just did on that stage." As Director Petrov walked away to prepare for the second half, Anthony led Elena to a quiet corner backstage. Students and faculty kept stopping to congratulate her, to shake her hand, to welcome her into their musical community. Each interaction seemed to add a little more light to her eyes, a little more certainty to her posture. "So," Anthony said when they finally had a moment alone, "what will you do? Will you accept the position?" Elena looked thoughtful. "I think, yes, but I'll need to give proper notice with the cleaning company. And I'll need help preparing lesson plans, learning the curriculum." "I can help with that," Anthony offered. "I know you can." She smiled up at him. "You've helped me with so much already." "We've helped each other," he corrected. "You reminded me why I became a musician in the first place, not to impress or achieve, but to communicate, to connect." Elena's eyes softened. "And you gave me back a part of myself I thought was lost forever." A call came for the second half participants to take their places. Anthony had another performance scheduled, a trio with Lucia and Dr. Huang. "I should go," he said reluctantly. Elena nodded. "I'll be right here listening." As Anthony took his place on stage for the trio, he found himself playing with a newfound freedom and joy. His eyes occasionally drifted to where Elena sat in the wings, her face glowing with the aftermath of her triumph, and he realized how profoundly both their lives had changed in just a few short weeks. The elite violinist who had once looked down on a cleaning woman had discovered his own blind spots and prejudices. The woman who had buried her talent beneath years of necessary survival had reclaimed her voice and her place in the world of music. And together, they had created something neither could have anticipated, a partnership that transcended both music and personal connection, built on mutual respect, shared passion, and the courage to begin again. 6 months later, Elena's first student recital filled the small performance space in the conservatory's East Wing. Children from the community outreach program, many of whom had never touched a piano before meeting Elena, played simple pieces with focused concentration. In the front row, Anthony watched with pride as Elena guided each student with the perfect balance of discipline and encouragement. Her accent, which she had once been so self-conscious about, had become a beloved feature of her teaching style. Her clear instructions delivered with musical precision and warmth. The cleaning company had been sorry to lose her, but they'd sent flowers for her debut faculty recital 2 months earlier. Her former supervisor had sat in the audience, clapping as loudly as anyone when Elena performed Chopin's Ballade No. 1, with the technical command and emotional depth that had become her signature. After the student recital, as parents congratulated their children and enjoyed punch and cookies, Elena found her way to Anthony's side. "What did you think?" she asked, her eyes bright with the pleasure of successful teaching. "Incredible," he replied honestly. "They adore you." "I adore them," she said simply. "Each one brings something different to the music, something uniquely theirs." Anthony took her hand, still amazed at how naturally their fingers intertwined now, just like their teacher. Elena smiled, no longer the hesitant, fearful woman he had first challenged all those months ago. just like all of us, if we're brave enough to play from the heart.